Hello, and welcome back to Physician Career Guide. I'm Sheri Clarke. Today's episode is number 102, Choosing a Specialty. You wouldn't believe the things that you have to think about when you choose what specialty that you would like to be board certified in. So let's join a presentation I did recently for a medical school on this issue. Let's talk about picking the right specialty for you. This is really, really important. This is a big decision in your life, and much like picking a college major, there's times when you have decisions that you've made that you choose to go back and change the direction. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. But things that you need to think about. I really recommend you don't rush into anything, that you leave your options open until you really must decide. And of course, you must decide when you're applying for residencies. But we have actually seen that there are actually times when people apply for two different specialties as they're applying for residencies, and they figure whichever one I get is the one I'll take. So there's a possibility that you could be going all the way up through the match not knowing what your specialty is. And there's some really important things you need to know about that, and we'll talk about that later. So leave the options open, be open-minded, experience as many choices as possible. You might have decided to go to medical school because you wanted to do X, but after you've actually experienced it and gone down the rotations and seen the physicians and how they are dealing with that lifestyle or any other number of things, you might decide that, I really don't want to do X. Maybe I want to do Y. So this is where you get to experience that. Shadow while you're on your break. If you get a break in this program, you might be able to spend some time with some physicians that are in that area. Use your electives wisely. Go to special events that are made for medical students to speak to the physicians and ask questions. We used to have one in the Lansing area where you could actually go and sit at a table that was just each specialty had a table and talk to a physician about what's it like, what's your day like, would you do it differently, what kinds of advice would you have for me. Those types of things are really important to talk to a physician about who's in the specialty you're thinking about going into. I suggest that you keep a journal of your experiences. I don't mean you have to sit down every day and write out and free write and things like that, but I'm thinking about when you are actually on rotation, pay attention to what your feelings are. Do you dread going into the rotation? Are you really happy about going into the rotation? Watch the attendings for cues about their lifestyle. Talk to the residents and attendings while you're on rotation about their choice of specialty. And also journal your thoughts about your patient experiences. Sometimes a really good patient experience or a really bad patient experience can change your mind about what you want to do as a specialty. Here's a list of things to think about. Lifestyle, work-life balance, what's right for you. Length of training, residencies, fellowships. Do you really want to do all this extra training to subspecialize, or do you want to get into a residency and get out and start practicing? Work hours and shift time. Are you a morning person? Because if you're not, you really don't want to go into surgery or anesthesiology. What are your scores? Are you a competitive candidate for that specialty? And there's actually resources where you can go and look at the common scores for a specific specialty that the AAMC actually prints out or publishes every year. And the NRMP actually has the publishing of that too. Research requirements. Is it an academic rigor within this specialty that you're interested in? Are the subject matters, something that you're interested in? What are your research interests, and do they actually match? Physical requirements of the specialty. If you're required to be on your feet and running around the hospital or sitting at a desk, what are the different things that are of interest to you physically? Communication styles. This is one that I've seen a lot of residents make mistakes in regards to how they communicate. Do you want a long-term relationship with your patients? If so, you might want to be family medicine, where you get to meet them and get to know them. You get to know their kids, their grandkids, and you have a relationship with the patients for a long period of time. Or do you want to diagnose and treat and move on to the next patient? Then maybe emergency medicine is the right one for you. Do you want to work at the bedside, or do you want to work behind the scenes? In the bedside at the hospital, you want to be inpatient, outpatient, OR, reading room. What type of work environment do you want to be at when you're dealing with the patients? And also, when you have two specialties in mind, you need to think about starting with the longest residency first, and that's a funding eligibility issue, and we'll talk about that more again in a little while. Now let's go to that funding eligibility issue. So don't read all of this. This is just for your use after the fact. But basically, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they actually pay for a portion of residency. And it's based on a very complicated formula, and there's a per resident amount, and there's a cap of the maximum number of residents that they'll pay for at the hospitals. The per resident amount has been determined back in the 90s for all of the residents that are currently training right now. So there's some hospitals that don't get as much money as hospitals than other hospitals that do. And historically, the osteopathic hospitals who worked with faculty who volunteered their time didn't claim those expenses, and therefore their per resident amount was set at a lower rate. So the historically osteopathic hospitals just tend to not get as much money from the government as the other hospitals do. When hospitals are looking at their residents, they're looking at your funding eligibility, and they're wanting to maximize their reimbursement. So when you're a categorical or preliminary resident, your PGY1 determines your initial residency program. It sets what your funding is. So going back to that first grid that we saw, if you're a family medicine resident, your funding is 3 years. If you're a general surgery resident, your funding is 5 years, etc. Transitional year delays that a little bit because you haven't identified your specialty, and so that's determined by your PGY2 year, and that determines what your eligibility is. So the length of time that you have designated for your initial residency program is set by either your PGY1 or PGY2 year. So why is this important for your specialty choice? If you're torn between two specialty options and the tiebreaker is, you just can't figure out how to choose between the two of them, the tiebreaker should always be choose the longest one. And here's why. It is the most beneficial to you as a trainee and to the hospital for you to choose that. And let me give you two examples of why that's the case. So in most cases, when you transfer from one specialty to another, if you got, say, 2 years of training in, you'll get some what's called advanced standing. 6 months of advanced standing is the max that they'll give you. And so they basically say, yeah, you've had enough training that we can say that you're past this introductory stage, so you can jump into the 7th month of this new specialty that you're looking at. So let's look at Dr. Amy here on this slide. Dr. Amy went into general surgery, and that's a 5-year program. And after being in general surgery for about 1.5 years, decided, I really don't like general surgery, and I want to go into emergency medicine. I want to be able to do procedures, and I don't want to be standing in the OR for hours on end or whatever the reason. So emergency medicine is a 3-year program. So Dr. Amy had 2 years of general surgery, and the same hospital, allowed her to move over to emergency medicine. But she had to start all over. So if you look here, her first year, PGY1 year, she was in general surgery, and she was the first level of resident. Okay, I just use R1, R2 for what training they're having in the program. Her second year out of school, she had general surgery, and she was an R2. Now she switches over to emergency medicine. So now her third year out of school, she returns back to a first year resident level in a new specialty. And then she has 3 years to go in that specialty. And then she can graduate mid-year because she's going to get 6 months of advanced standing. So she's really going to be spending 2.5 years in this emergency medicine world. So that allows her to have full funding for her entire training because she had 5 years of funding to begin with, and she ends up graduating with after 4.5 years. Now let's go the opposite direction, and Dr. Matt decided to go into emergency medicine, which is a 3-year program, but decided that really wasn't what he wanted to do, and he really loved the procedure side. So he decides to go to general surgery, which is a 5-year program. So same type of thing, spend 2 years doing it, decide, you know what, I really want to do surgery, switches back over to surgery in the 3rd year and does 5 years or 4.5 years if you get advanced standing of surgery to graduate mid-year, the 7th year after he graduated medical school. So full funding was only for 3 years because his original initial program was 3 years. He graduated in 6.5 years, and so it was longer training for him because he started with a shorter program and ended up going to the longer program. But his funding was a problem. He only got 3 years of full funding, which meant that the hospital had to pick up another 3.5 years of funding where they couldn't claim him fully. And if they are above their cap, which is how we refer to it in GME world, and they're only able to claim a certain portion of the resident time and salary, that's going to be a significant cost to the hospital. So they have to really like you a lot to want to keep you and pay for the extra cost to keep you training in that program. So if it's a tiebreaker between 2 programs and they have different amounts of time, it is always in your best interest, as far as any of the examples I've ever seen, to go with the longest one first. If you find these videos to be helpful, please like us and subscribe to our channel so that we can get the information out to more medical students and residents that can benefit from the value of these videos. Thank you.